As of February 2022, we currently have some of the best roller coasters to have ever existed. However, if we take a look back in time, there are still some pretty great roller coasters. So today, I'm going to be counting down the top 10 defunct roller coasters which I wish I could have ridden. Number 10, Eagle Fortress at Avalanche. A lot of you may be very surprised to see this coaster this low on the list. However, even though I couldn't find a spot any higher, this doesn't mean that it looks like a bad ride. Built by Aerodynamics in 1992, this was one of their suspended coasters, and the main reason why I had to make the list is due to its setting. Eagle Fortress is located right on a hill, and as you head through the layout, you head through some of the most insane turns ever created, and due to the coaster also having swinging trains, it just brings this coaster to another level. But as of course it didn't look like the smoothest of roller coasters, I couldn't put it any higher than at number 10. However, you still can't doubt that this is one of the most impressive roller coasters to have ever been built. Number 9, Avalanche at Timber Falls Adventure Park. One of the most unique roller coasters to make this list comes in the form of a wooden coaster. Built by S&S Sansei, this is one of 4 to have ever been built, and for some reason this coaster just never gets brought up. However, even though its main negative was likely the roughness, it still had one of the best layouts with a ton of airtime and also some great pacing. This was all possible by the coaster only having a 3-card train. However, this coaster was unfortunately removed back in 2017, and so was most of the park, and from what I know there is only one ride standing along with a golf course, but from watching tons of POVs, this is like one amazing roller coaster. Number 8, Vortex at Kings Island. After experiencing Viper at Six Flags Magic Mountain back in 2019, I knew that I needed to experience more aerodynamics coasters, and one that came to mind was Vortex at Kings Island. This was arguably the most similar coaster to Viper, so I knew I had to get out to a higher to experience it. However, later that year, it was announced that Vortex would be closing for good. This was obviously really sad to hear. However, I can still look back on how amazing it looked. Some of the standout elements would have likely included the Batwing and also the double corkscrews. These are like some great elements, but what interested me the most was the height. Vortex stood at just under 150 feet tall, making it one of the tallest aerodynamics roller coasters to have ever been built. Number 7, Hypersonic XLC at King's Dominion. Back in 2001, S&S Sansei introduced their first ever thrust air coaster. This came in the form of Hypersonic XLC. However, later that year they went on to build one other roller coaster of its kind, and that was of course Dodo Dumper at Fuji Q Highland. But after only 6 years of operation, that version at King's Dominion closed for good. And even though one of 2 are now shut, you still can't doubt how amazing it looked. The standout part of the ride would likely have been the compressed air launch. This brought riders to 80 miles an hour in just under 1.8 seconds. This would have of course been one of the best launches ever created. However, after that amazing launch, the layout wasn't actually that great. This was due to how short the coaster was. However, it still looked amazing and I would have definitely loved to have experienced it. Number 6, Speed the Ride at NASCAR Cafe. After boarding 2 other LIM shuttle loop coasters, Premier Rides and also NASCAR Cafe made the decision to build one more, and this was of course Speed the Ride. Built in 2000, this was arguably one of the best roller coasters in the state. However, in the 2011 season, the coaster got removed and got relocated to London, Las Vegas. This unfortunately never got built, meaning that the coaster became SBNO. However, even though it was quite similar to the other LIM shuttle loop coasters, it still had its differences, with the main being the setting. And as much as the 2 other coasters look great, I still can't help but think the setting along with the coaster itself would have likely made this the best Premier Rides coaster ever built. Number 5, Batman and Robin the Chiller at Six Flags Great Adventure. Another Premier Rides roller coaster to make the list comes in at number 5. Built back in 1998, this was their first ever attempt at a dueling coaster, with one side being called Batman and with the other being called Robin. However, just after a few years of operation, it started causing the park loads of issues, so in the 2007 season they decided to replace the 0G roll with an airtime hill. This was of course a great replacement due to the ride lacking on airtime. However, later that year they decided to close it down for good. This was really sad to hear due to being one of the only launched dueling coasters. But even though this coaster is now removed, there are still 2 other roller coasters which do look to have a very similar ride experience. Number 4, Dueling Dragons at Universal Studios Islands of Adventure. Out of any of the roller coasters on this list, this is the one coaster which I wish was still operating today, and that's due to being a pair of B&M inverts. But what made it so much worse was that when I last visited back in 2016, I wasn't tall enough to ride. This obviously meant that I couldn't ride it. However, I still thought that I could make a return visit in the future to experience it, but it was unfortunately announced that in 2017 the coaster would never operate again, and even though this coaster got removed just under 5 years ago, it still looked amazing, with some of the standout elements would likely include the loop and also the cobra roll. So with all of that, there is no doubt why so many people called it one of the best B&Ms. Number 3, Volcano the Blast Coaster at King's Dominion. Arguably one of the best roller coasters ever created comes in the form of Volcano the Blast Coaster, and as much as the layout looked like one of the best in the world, what made it for most guests was that you launched out of a volcano. This looked like one of the best moments on any roller coaster around the world. However, just like a lot of roller coasters, it was removed in 2018 due to all of the mechanical issues. However, for a very short amount of time, King's Dominion had one of the best top 3 lineups in the world, with Intimidator 305, Twisted Timbers, and of course Volcano the Blast Coaster. So even though it had a lot of issues over the years, it still looked like one of the best roller coasters ever built. Number 2, Titanic at Space World. Built by Aerodynamics in 1994, this was one of their hypercoasters, and where the other 4 got nothing but great reviews, you never heard anything about Titanic, and I don't really know why this is, but it still looked like a really fun ride. And even though this looked like one of the weaker hypercoasters, it still looked to have a great first drop along with some good airtime hills. But what amazed me the most with this coaster were the trains. Unlike many aerodynamic hypercoasters, this started off with the usual trains. However, for the park's 25th anniversary, they decided to replace them to ones built by S&S Sansei. This would have likely improved the experience and definitely one of the reasons why I really wanted to experience this rare coaster. Number 1, Sun and Beast at Kings Island. As much as this may have been one of the roughest roller coasters to have ever been built, it was still a huge project for the park that I knew I had to include it on the list. However, what made this such an iconic coaster? To start off with, this was the first and only wooden roller coaster to reach 200 feet tall. However, what made this coaster so unique was that it was the first ever wooden roller coaster to feature an inversion, and as much as this looked amazing, it was apparently very rough and uncomfortable. However, due to the loop causing loads of mechanical issues, they decided to remove it in 2007, and as much as this made the ride slightly more reliable, Kings Island made the final decision to close it in 2009. However, it still looked like a really unique coaster and definitely one that I would have loved to have experienced. I hope you have enjoyed me counting down the top 10 defunct roller coasters which I wish I could have ridden. If you have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a comment down below. Thank you for watching, I'll see you in the next one.